with a beautiful wife. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here?
But like I had to look in the mirror. I've never opened Excel, and I've been the CEO of an $11 billion 18 house. It bothered
that is remarkable. There should be an award for that.
It bothered the hell out of my board. And like they wanted to know like why I don't go to the, budget meetings or, because I said, I don't know how to open Excel. I actually erase it from my computer to get more space. And they said, well, I thought you got a degree from Wharton. I said, I did.
Same as it ever was. 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 Water dissolving and water removing. There is water at the bottom of the ocean. Under the water, carry the water.
Hello and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and this podcast brings you stories and wisdom from some of the best leaders in healthcare today. Today, it is my honor to introduce a pioneer in healthcare innovation, Dr. Stephen Klasko, a physician, former obstetrician, healthcare CEO, medical school dean, and university president. Stephen's distinguished career began with his undergraduate degree from Lehigh University. He earned his MD from Drexel University College of Medicine, where he later returned as dean, completed his OB residency at Lehigh Valley Health Network, and earned his MBA from Wharton. He is also adding a JD from the University of New Hampshire, class of 2027, to his remarkable list of accomplishments. Stephen is consistently recognized among Becker's top 100 leaders in healthcare, including the latest list in 2024. Over the past 7 years, he has been named the number 2 most influential person in healthcare by Modern Healthcare, the number 21st most creative business person by Fast Company, and a distinguished fellow of the World Economic Forum. In addition to authoring books like Unhealthcare, a Manifesto for Health Assurance with Hemant Taneja, and Feelin' All Right, How the Message and the Music Can Make Healthcare Healthier, his newest groundbreaking book with Ryan Donahue, Patient No Longer, How You Can Lead the Consumer Revolution, is set to redefine patient care and consumer engagement. And when he's not transforming healthcare or advising top global institutions, you might just find him spinning records as the DJ of disruption. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thanks. And I think I have a lot more stories than wisdom, but I'll try to do both.
This is your show. I'm the guest, so you do what you need to do. And in a few minutes, we'll get right into it. But I want to take just a moment to go back and forth in time. And if I can navigate the Wayback Machine for just a few moments before we get too far into the show. All right, cool. So let's jump back for a moment to the early 1960s when my father graduated Lafayette with a degree in chemistry. And in the 1970s, when I was a little kid, he took me to football games between Lafayette and their bitter rival, Lehigh, your alma mater. Did you
One
ever...
of the oldest rivalries in the nation, I might add.
And did you ever attend any of those games in the 70s?
Well, not only did I attend, remember, this was fraternity life in the 70s, and I'm not proud of this, but we actually shaved an L into one of the, hope it wasn't your dad, but one of the Lafayette folks that we, and back then I was afraid of retaliation. Now it wouldn't be, I had a pretty big hair thing going on.
You had an afro. I've seen pictures of that. You've shown that picture. So my dad had a nickname in his fraternity. Did you have a nickname in yours?
No, since I was a DJ, they called me Stevie K the DJ, but yeah.
My dad was known as Shark, of all things. So perhaps we were in the stands. I was a little kid, and you were probably a little bit older. But let's fast forward to Dallas, 2024, exactly almost 1 year ago. That was at the time that after you had concluded a keynote presentation about the future of medicine, I just approached you. I approached you to chat, and we spoke about a great many things that night. And the next thing I know is you agreed to write the foreword for my book. And I want to publicly acknowledge to the listeners by saying I'm very appreciative of your help on that project. You have written books, and they are a test of endurance and, while at the same time, a labor of love. So your contribution to my book means a lot, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, Lee, I really enjoyed it. One of the things that I really love is when there's a book that gets me excited. And, and your book, because it was not just philosophy. I mean, there's so many books that basically highlight the problem without solution. That's a problem in healthcare today. Your book, your book did it in a way that literally somebody could read it and understand what at least some next steps could be in a very provocative way. So it was really an honor to be able to write forward.
I appreciate that. Well, this show, the book, all of this is a product of conversations and connections like the one you and I made in Dallas, that there's a real need to educate and to facilitate the advancement of physicians into leadership roles, solving problems, and sharing what it is like to hold all of these roles and the responsibilities of physician leadership in healthcare. And our show has the focus on the chief medical officer, but regardless of that, let's put you back into the time machine and get into it. What was your original plan when you chose to apply to medical school? What was your initial thought of what it would be like as soon as you graduated?
Well, just parenthetically, I wanted to be a DJ, and I started my career actually doing that. And then I basically got fired. And, because I had been a chemistry major, I went back to Lehigh, and they said, I said, well, what am I going to do? They said, well, you're obviously not going to be a DJ. Got fired from your first job. So, why don't you apply to medical school? I said, why would I want to do that? And as it turns out, I wrote the only honest personal statement in the history of the universe. Like, through medical schools, and every single, I'm sure many people in your audience did that. When I was 3, I hurt my thumb. I went to the ER, and I decided then, in the crib that I wanted to be a doctor. I did no, I never wanted to be a doctor. I got a special delivery rejection from my first medical school interview, an arrogant neurosurgeon from Temple. And this was in the 70s. So special delivery rejections was somebody knocking on your door and telling you that Temple really doesn't want you. And my second interview was at what's now Drexel. And honestly, I had done a midnight to 5 gig DJing where I got fired in a Philadelphia radio station called WISP. And it turns out that the interviewer was an obstetrician, like I am. We get up from midnight to 5. He wasn't impressed with my science GPA or my NCATs, but at the bottom it said Little Stevie Kent, WISP. He said, oh my God, I've almost missed some deliveries listening to your stories. Turns out the head of admissions was also an obstetrician. Came running over and said, hey, it would be great if you came here. I lied a little bit, said Temple really wants me, but I'd much rather come here. And I got in 2 weeks later. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that I loved being able to use my hands in ways. I love solving problems, but I also wanted to be with people. So, I was really torn between, do I become a surgeon where I'd really get to use my hands, but really, then lose track of folks to become a family doc where I'd be able to have lifelong opportunities, but to be with people, but really not necessarily do surgery. And at that time, OBGYN was the perfect situation because it was before a lot of the subspecialties. I sort of was a high risk obstetrician before fellowships really started, but you were part of people's lives. But I was doing microsurgery and tubal reversals. I was doing cancer surgery. I was delivering babies. I was delivering high risk babies, and literally you couldn't be more of a person's life. And you were seeing the very high when things went well, and the worst things that could happen in the world to many of these people when things did. So for me, that's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to go in private practice. I wanted to be, the kind of person that women in the community wanted to have deliver because I became part of what they did. And, I guess what I'd say, Lee, is I did what now you hire consultants to do patient-centered care. I actually cared. Somebody called me at 5:30. I'd see them at 6:30. When I did yearly exams, I would ask them 2 or 3 questions about them. And then my husband's having prostate cancer surgery. My son's on the tennis team at Swarthmore. And then the next year I'd start out with those things. How's your husband doing? And that led to people talking to me at a different level than they talk to most of their docs.
Yeah, you follow the dictum, whether you were taught it or you just identified it. And I learned it as I began to care for hospice patients. You've got to learn to meet people where they're at. And I know that's important in some of the other work that you do. We can get into that. if you don't know where they're at mentally, spiritually, physically, you're going to have a harder time. It's not impossible, but you make it better for them and for yourself if you know where they are and meet them where they're at either most vulnerable or most scared or what have you. So,
and by the way,
Go ahead.
Let me just say that really transcends into business, and for the chief medical officers in your audience that are looking at getting into that world. So if you take what you just said, in some respects makes a good doctor. One of the things you learned at Wharton, which is very hard for docs, is the best negotiators don't think about what they want. Exactly the same way as you said it with patients, they look at what the other party wants and looks at how they can get what the other party wants and in the best way for themselves or at the lowest cost to themselves. And it's, I did a grant after Wharton on what makes docs different than, depending on the audience, either other people or normal people, in how we handle change. And that was one of the real problems, is that we as docs think power negotiation is, I want this, and it's really not that.
Yeah. You and I talked about this last year, the self-selection process of how we entered into medical school may not be the way we really want to select people going forward. And so with that in mind, right? So you're going to go out and practice, you're going to be an obstetrician, you're going to be a community-based, but have that wide breadth of experience and knowledge. Next thing you know, you're a dean, right? So how did you evolve into getting into an academic space and getting to the dean level?
Yeah, and I guess what I'd say to everybody out there is, if you try to go in your career in a linear way, the chances of that happening are zero. So I guess the difference between maybe myself and a lot of my colleagues, because almost everybody I know is still delivering babies in Allentown, Pennsylvania, is, the other part of my life is I got my pilot's license, I jump out of planes. So I was not that typical risk-averse doc. So the simple answer to your question is, in the 80s, 97% of OBGYNs were male. We could do a little survey among your audience. Number one performed procedure in the country in the 80s, hysterectomy, removing the uterus, followed closely by C-section. And I happened to be, done nothing academically, happened to be a Penn State lecturer, a very old obstetrician, as I remember him, actually probably my age. Well, that's a little depressing.
Careful.
Yeah,
Keep going.
But anyhow, was talking about hysterectomy. I was telling the students, hey, look, if you see a small fibroid, just take out the uterus, because patient doesn't need that after she's had children. I happened to be at Barnes & Noble that night. 4 of the top 10 nonfiction bestsellers were What My Hysterectomy Did to Me, The Hysterectomy Hoax, How Hysterectomy Ruined My Life. So it was my first aha moment that holy moly, we're teaching these kids just ridiculous stuff. So I took an 80% pay cut, went into academics doing some of the early work on psychologic and sexual effects of hysterectomy. Spoiler alert, there are a lot. And actually went out to Houston for a little bit and get to help with a couple patents on what we then used to avoid hysterectomy, like YAG lasers and that kind of thing. That led to my academic career, which is not something I had any intention of ever doing. And then I became a chair of OBGYN and
So Stephen, thank you. That answers so many questions. So as a medical student, you have this vision of how you're going to practice in your community, but there's a part of you clearly, and it came out in that conversation, where you're thinking about how it should be done and how it could be done. And you're thinking long-term, which is a skill in leadership, to have a future forward-facing vision about how things might be better or ought to be better, and then work towards that end. So did you have any idea, either at that early stage of your practice or even when you got into the academic world, what doctoring would look like today in 2025? Or was it rather you were thinking how it should look in 2025?
I think what I recognized is that what hasn't changed is that we were developing, at that time, because remember, Star Wars, I think, was 76. We were developing these Star Wars technologies for individual patients, in my case, in women's health, in a Fred Flintstone healthcare delivery system. I looked at how healthcare was delivered, and I looked at my mentors in obstetrics who, we're very much, hey, your patients are lucky to see me. We're doctors. They're not nurses. If they can't read our handwriting, get new nurses. And I said, like, this is crazy, and so I knew that my personality was such that I would not want to live in that Fred Flintstone healthcare delivery system world. I knew that I had the kind of mentality of, I'm willing to lead with my head and take some punches, but I'd like to be part of something very different. My first startup company, by the way, was called Spirit of Women, because back in the 80s, women's health didn't exist. If you looked at hospitals back in the 80s, for any of you out there that are my age, we looked at women as organs. There was the uterus center, there was the fallopian tube center, there was the ovary center. In fact, our stealth company was called NJRO, not just reproductive organs. And it became Spirit of Women, and it became a very successful company, about 150 hospitals. And I realized, like, this is like taking candy from a baby. All we were doing was saying women are sentient human beings that have different needs. So if you're a hospital, think about the patient as a woman, not as an ovary or a breast, right. And Ford became the Spirit of Women car. I mean, it was more of a marketing thing, but it had me understand that there's some easy things where you can do well and do good, and that generally the healthcare system doesn't encourage you to think that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. And in that same way, so what do you believe that our current students will be doctoring? What will they be doing? What will it look like in 2035? What will it look internally? Will it still be Fred Flintstone? Will it be horse and buggy? Will we have Star Wars? And then kind of externally to the women that are needing care, that are whole human beings, right? Like, so internally and externally, what do you think it'll look like in about 10 years?
Yeah. So look, first of all, I'd be fired by General Catalyst or .go if I went 16 minutes and 32 seconds and didn't put A and I in the same. So I do think that left to our own devices, there might not have been that much of a revolution as far as, where doctors see themselves. I do think that ambient, augmented, artificial, whatever word you want to use, especially once we get to general AI, where as Ray Kurzweil talks about, in the singularity is nearer, where human and AI start to merge. So I believe that, first of all, education has to turn into humanics, that AI will not take your job, but somebody who really knows how to use AI will. So, that medical education has to be so much more about using these technologies. I mean, really training people to use generative AI, how to assess generative AI, recognizing that, think about this for a minute, Lee, when we're practicing, even 5-10 years ago, I mean, if I told somebody I had lupus in pregnancy and they say, I went on Google, and they come with 10 pages, and, if I found out that, St. John's wort can help, better than what you're, I could almost knee jerk and say, look, that's ridiculous. You can't go on Google. Okay. Fast forward to today with ChatGPT 4.5, which is their newest version. The same thing happens. And if I knee jerk that and I say, look, I just went on ChatGPT 4.5, I got the pro thing, and it says X, Y, and Z might work. And I say, look, you can't go on. They said, well, then you must disagree with the chair of obstetrics at University of California, San Francisco, that yesterday in the New England Journal of Medicine said exactly what I'm talking about works. So do you disagree with him, Dr. Klasko, or did you not read that NEJM article yesterday, which is exactly germane to what you're telling me I should do? Okay. So yes, I mean, our world's going to change. And because my research at Wharton showed that we tend to be competitive, autonomous, hierarchical, and in some respects non-creative, a lot of us aren't going to be ready for that change. And the real important thing about the research I did on creativity is we are as creative. Everybody in this audience is creative as the 28-year-old Stanford dropouts that I hang out with in my current jobs, right? But if I ask those folks at A16Z or General Catalyst what got them to where they are, creativity would be number 1, 2, or 3 in 94% of the cases in our study. If I ask doctors, what got you to where you are? Chief medical officers, what got you to where? Focus, strategy, discipline. So what we came up with my colleague from Wharton is, if you believe you're really creative and the world around you is changing, tsunamiing, this is great because I'm going to succeed in a tsunami environment. If you're a competitive, autonomous, hierarchical, strategy-focused, discipline person, by definition, you're going to be wary of the world around you changing, that you might not succeed in that because you succeed in strategy-focused discipline. That's the biggest change that I think is going to happen, because AI and consumers having their mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore moment, which is what my new book is about, is going to change your world. Whether you're a practicing doc or a practicing doc and a chief medical officer, or you aspire to, be a horse whisperer between the new world and the old world, you're going to have to recognize that patients are going to have greater power, that AI will have greater power, and your role as a human becomes even more important, not less important, but more important. But we're not necessarily selected and educated to be great humans. We're selected and educated to be great scientists.
Yeah. Wow. There is a ton to unpack there. One of my friends, who's a chief medical officer in Houston, said it very nicely, and I imagine you would concur. He believes chief medical officers can act as change agents, right? That's their role. That they see the future, they're playing with the future, they come from the past, and they're trying to bring people through that change at a structural level. Now, it could be very local, very parochial, whether it's in Houston or Northern California, it doesn't matter. But they have that adaptive mindset. I've trained as a physician. I know that old institutional world, but the future is over here, and we got to get from here to here. So does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, although I think, for the chief medical officers out in the audience, I think you have to be very, very, very concerned about how you define yourself and what you call yourself, so you don't get trivialized. And when I say trivialized, I think a lot of chief medical officers have really become chief quality officers. And the people that are doing what you're saying are chief transformation officers, chief innovation officers, chief medical innovation officers. Probably the best person I hired when I was CEO of a $10 billion health system in Philadelphia was a CMSMIO, chief medical social media information officer, a guy named Dr. Chang, who's a TikTok darling. When we were trying to get people vaccinated in Philadelphia, he was more important than my CMO doing a 30-second commercial. He was out on TikTok doing jumping jacks after he got his vaccine. So I think, the book that I wrote with Hemant Taneja, who's the CEO of General Catalyst, who I now work for, really started out in essence, what if a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and a CEO of an academic medical center had a baby? What would that baby look like? And we actually brought somebody from GC on my cabinet, and I think that if you decide as a chief medical officer that you want to stay in the traditional healthcare ecosystem, whatever that is, hospitals, payers, and you want to be the number 2 person, or the number 1 person, you have to redefine yourself from a traditional chief medical officer role, which is, I'm checking press scanning scores, I'm checking quality scores. And you have to be that person that's willing to lead change and do it in a way that can help other physicians understand why that's going to be good for them. So to me, what the initials after your name don't matter at all. I mean, I'm in the worst situation because MBAs don't view me as a real businessman because I'm a doctor. Doctors don't view me as a real doc because I'm a business person. When I get my JD, everybody will think I'm a fraud. So
they'll think that you messed up DJ with JD. They're like, "What did you do?"
It's true. I'll have to. My next book, I think, will be like, "I used to hate lawyers, now I am one," or something like that. But no. But seriously, I think you have to be credible and be good at doing what your colleagues do. I mean, I think the thing I was best at, honestly, in my 40-some year career as a 71-year-old is delivering babies and talking to patients. I mean,
so let's back up again. I want to unpack a little bit more. So Chief Medical Officer, I agree with you. It has evolved from the traditional VPMA, Vice President of Medical Affairs, about credentialing and peer review and the MEC and the fireworks that occur every month at MEC or at a faculty meeting, however you want to look at that universe. And it has evolved to a quality and or operations role, Chief Clinical Operating Officer, Chief Medical and Operating Officer. It's really a Chief Metrics Officer. I mean, it's all, so if you really want to play around with the letters, Chief Metric Officer, the Press Ganey scores, the length of stay, X, Y, and Z, utilization management, ABC, it doesn't matter. But I do believe that the CMOs that I'm engaging with, who I counsel to have 10 to 15 years of credible clinical practice. Don't just come out of residency and get an MBA and then call yourself some leader in healthcare. That's a little unfair to the folks that are on the front lines. And to your point, you really don't have credibility until you've been in the trenches for a period of time and can hang out in the doctor's lounge and talk that talk and walk that walk and be in the shop with them. Totally agree. But maybe the chief medical officer is evolving to, and I've also counseled, take quality under you, take case management under you, get some vice presidents to run those shops, and you become innovative, transformative, chief transformation medical officer. To me, again, the letters don't matter, but the world doesn't understand it, so they only understand chief medical officer or something else. But what you do, what your job is, what your title is, and what your work is, 3 different things. And I advise people to pay attention to their job description and what the work that they do. Is their work leading? Is it transforming? Is it engaging? Is it becoming a doctor whisperer, right? You mentioned horse whisperer. So you are the universal translator. You're the only one who can hang out in the ED and the lounge and the C-suite and be legitimate in each sphere of that universe, so to speak, or that galaxy. So those are some of the thoughts. We could probably spend an hour on that, but we're gonna keep moving. Unless you have any other comments about.
Well, I just think, look, one of my Wharton professors used to say, you should always have 5 people under you that think they can do a better job than you, and 3 that are right.
Agree.
So I think one of the things that I think you can, because you're right, you can, if you're good enough, you can define your own role, and call it what you will. I agree with that. It doesn't matter. But like I had to look in the mirror. I've never opened Excel, and I've been the CEO of an $11 billion 18 hospital. It bothered
that is remarkable. There should be an award for that.
It bothered the hell out of my board. And in fact, like literally toward the end, I had a very different board because, we had 7 acquisitions and they were much more auditors. And like, they wanted to know like why I don't go to the, budget meetings or, because I said, I don't know how to open Excel. I actually erase it from my computer to get more space. And they said, well, I thought you got a degree from Wharton. I said, I did. My thesis at Wharton was the difference in management styles between Captain Kirk in the first Star Trek and Captain Picard in the second Star Trek. And the reason I'm bringing that up is I never tried to pretend that I was anything other than a really good strategist, someone that's willing to lead a place in the future, and somebody that can really get people to want to follow. Like that. That's what I'm good at. So I was not threatened when I ran an 18-hospital system, a 2-campus university, and an insurance company, to have people under me that were much better hospital CEOs than I was, provost, much better, university traditional, person than I was, health system, much better health system leader than I was, but I was the best person to be the orchestra conductor. So I think the reason I'm saying that for your CMOs is you have to decide what you're really good at, and not try to fit into a square peg if you're a round person, and then try to develop the job and the job title around what you're good at. And then to your point, get the people under you so a lot of times people, chief medical officers and even CEOs, don't want to get people that are way different and better than they are at what they're different than, because it'll get exposed what they're not good at.
Yeah.
And I think you really have to take almost the opposite approach.
Yeah, and the D school at Stanford, and I'm sure you're familiar, where they began to put plumbers and dentists and carpet layers in a room to figure out how to construct something.
Right.
The difference and the diversity of thought and creativity is a powerful thing, and it's something that physicians aren't taught or trained to do. Look, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. You definitely want people to have your job, so people that are hungry to be better than you, to be smarter than you, absolutely. And sometimes your superpower can also be a blind spot. We probably have the same DNA fault. I've been analyzed through all this executive coaching and Hogan assessments, and it always comes up the same thing. Gee, Dr. Scheinbart, you don't seem to be intimidated by people in executive roles or in power. And I said, yeah, I'm not. I can talk to anybody. It doesn't bother me. I've taken care of some very sick and vulnerable people. And all that goes out the window when I'm dealing with that difficult moment in their life. So I can talk to anybody, to which they say, that's your blind spot. That'll get you in trouble. I said, so be it, because I'll ride that crest for as long and as hard as I can, because I think it's going to your point, it's going to pull people behind me, because I can lean into that where other people can't. And so I agree with you. If you identify your superpower, put your cape on, utilize it, and excel, opportunities will open and people will follow you. And then you coach and mentor them. What's your superpower? What can you do that others cannot? And that will become a leadership attribute or competency that you can generate moving forward.
Can I just add one? If you have that mindset, that's your most important job, is to mentor folks, and then things like that happen. And, that's the things I'm most proud of. People I've never met before. Even when we were in Dallas, there was somebody I never met before that was younger and said, I don't know if you remember, but I called you when you were the CEO of University of South Florida because I wanted to go into, entrepreneurship, like off the cuff. And you actually answered me and met with me, which probably was no big deal for me. It was probably a half hour and some coffee, but it's a big deal to those people. So I wanted to put that out there because I think it's really important when you want to look back on your career.
And maybe by virtue of our training, even though it may not have been specific as we talked about how physicians are chosen, or at least back in the day, your day and my day, how we were chosen to enter into medical school and train as a physician. One of the things about our craft is it's an apprenticeship. And so we learn from the person above who learned from the person above, and it goes up and it goes down that chain, which allows us as physicians to learn how, like it or not, select it or not, to be a teacher, right? See one, do one, teach one. And there are 4 things that we tell our young folks to think about. At some point, you want to learn how to be a coach or to be coached or have a coach. Coach, like in golf and tennis, hit it the same way. The elbow's got to come in, lean down again and again and again. The coach tells you how to do that skill right in the OR, in the ED, whatever. A mentor is looking out for your best interests. They put their own interests aside. Like you said, I'm going to pick up the phone. It's a young physician. It's a student. I'm going to answer their query because it's in their best interest that I do that for them. That's what a mentor does. And then you have an advisor, where someone you can just get advice from, literally. And I do that with the students today. I'm sure you did that 1,000 times, which is not the same as mentoring and coaching, giving advice. A mentor doesn't give advice. They think about what's in your best interest and help you see it for yourself and bring you to a perspective that you weren't seeing for yourself. And you have to have a sponsor. At some point, you have to have a sponsor who's talking about you when you're not in the room, where you can't defend yourself. And hopefully they're saying good things about you that elevate you along. So we tell our young CMOs to have a personal board and have a coach, a mentor, an advisor, and a sponsor, and the future will unfold for them.
Yeah, and if I could just add one thing. If for any of the CMOs that don't have an MBA, thinking about getting an MBA, I'd make 2 suggestions. Decide why you want to do it. And depending on why you want to do it, think about where you're going. When I got my MBA in 1994, it was like, why did you mess up? Because
did you mess up?
And now half doctors have MBAs. So if you're really doing it because you want to have a fundamental change in your career, then you really have to go to one of the, top 5 MBA schools, whether it's online, hybrid, or whatever. But, the Whartons, the Kellogg's, the Harvards, the Stanfords. But the second thing is, I made a conscious decision that I took no health courses during my Wharton MBA. And, because I didn't really want to learn from the people that had screwed up the system. I wanted to learn from, what Apple did, what Lee Iacocca did in the car industry when that was non-creative. So I literally went through the 2 years, and actually opted out of every health course. And I think, I'm not saying you have to be that radical, but a lot of what I talk about now, both in my books and how I ran Jefferson, was I met with like the CEOs of Target and Walmart. And I said, when Amazon disrupted your industry, what did you decide? Well, Target and Walmart said, we're damn good at what we do, but we have to be just as good as Amazon in what they do. And that really hit me that, we have one of the best pancreatic cancer surgeons in the country at Jefferson. If you have pancreatic cancer, you didn't give a darn what our digital strategy was, what our, how big our TV was, or what our food was. You wanted to see Dr. Yo.
Yeah.
But for the 97% of people in Philadelphia that woke up in the morning and said, I'm not a patient, I'm a person that wants to be able to thrive without my diabetes, my congestive heart failure, my COPD getting in the way, we became the best for that. That was what we called healthcare at any address. That's what we wrote the book about.
I remember this.
I'm bringing that up because as you think about what you want to learn, whether it's MBA or MPH or whatever it is, you don't want to reinforce, to your point, the apprenticeship stuff that you probably know. If you've been the CMO of a hospital, you probably know what the CMO of Cleveland Clinic is going to teach you. I mean, maybe there's some things that they've done, but you could spend a half day there and not have to get an MBA to do that. But you should learn stuff that you go, aha.
Yeah, so I'm going to have to add one more category to how I tell people to have their own personal board of directors. And if they can have an innovative mentor, innovative advisor, or else just get an innovator who doesn't think within the ordinary construct, right? And think of a different universe, a different planet, and try to see how do we stop thinking the old way? AI, as we talked about more than a few minutes ago, I think of it, and I tell the students that I talk to about this, it's like when somebody first introduced a stethoscope to the first year medical student for the very first time. This is a tool that you will use to create a relationship with your patient because you're going to get real close. You're going to learn things. You're going to listen to things. You're going to understand something about their human well-being. AI will have the same utility as long as we teach it in the same way. It is a tool. You will be using it. This is what it does for you. This is how it will enable you, so on and so forth. And we have a lot of ground to cover. I do think it is going to be part of the future of how students learn, how residents learn, and so on and so forth. And I live just a couple hours north of you on the Space Coast, and I remember the very first rocket scientist that I took care of from NASA, and he had lymphoma. And I'm all full of my own ego, right? I know it's going to be chopped, and you're going to be cured of your non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And he comes in with spreadsheets, and this is dot matrix printer before Excel on a computer. And he had it all mapped out. He knew exactly what drugs and what dose and how often I was going to administer. He didn't even know why I was in the room. I mean, he had it all figured out. It's the same concept, just fast forward. Someone will have, and I have to say, you're absolutely right, sir. You've launched rockets. Now just go upstairs and get your chemotherapy, right? So somehow I had to navigate that because that person brought with them this tool that they knew how to use. And it's the same as what we talked about a few minutes ago.
One of the companies that I'm most excited about at GC is a company called Paradigm, which is democratizing clinical trials using AI. So if you're in Ocala, Florida, and you're rich, you have to go to, New York or Houston, to get phase 1B clinical trials, but if you're not, you're sort of stuck. It's not because your community oncologists can't do it. It's because of the infrastructure we've created with CROs. Paradigm is democratizing that. And I'm thinking, okay, it's great. And I love it. And, Ken Frazier, the CEO of Merck, and I are both on the board, former CEO of Merck, and I are both on the board. But we could have done that. Mm-hmm. We knew that clinical trials are stuck in the 90s.
But you're making a soft pitch, whether you realize it or not. And this is an area of hot debate, and maybe one of the hottest debates. The folks that are changing the structural delivery, and in some cases they've bungled it up, and in some cases they're doing it lights out, is the folks who are willing to take the risk to jump out of the plane with a bag full of money to do it. There's no question about that. The structural inertia of government and agencies and large institutions are going to continue to move at a snail's pace, and they're going to, as you have pointed out, face disruptions, and it's going to be a challenge. But to your point, why don't we do it? Because the we cannot, but there's another group that can, and those who can will. Period. End of story.
And let me just add that at a time where 30% of health systems are losing. Mm-hmm. I just gave a talk for Amgen, and I do this video where I come back from 2035. I'm now the chief digital health officer for President Taylor Swift, because the Swifties have become a political party.
Oh my, here we go. Unchained. Keep going.
I used to say we could do worse. I'll leave it to whether we did, but our healthcare motto is make it tailored to the individual and make it swift. Neither of which is true in 2025. And one of the things that I've done, to your point about disruption, one of my slides is a nonprofit healthcare board saying, instead of trying anything new, let's continue our slow decline to obsolescence. So what amazes me, sometimes makes me laugh, sometimes makes me cry. If I read Modern Healthcare, if I go to any of these conferences, I have this one slide where I've been doing this for 45 years of being the disruptor at conferences. And there's a Jason Kidd quote. He went to the Dallas Mavericks. They were 24-52, Lee. And at his press conference, he goes, I'm going to turn this team around 360 degrees. And I think about these problems, whether it's healthcare gaps or whether it's, getting out to healthcare at any address, or it's hard to get somebody to do something when their salary depends upon them not doing it, or why do orthopedic surgeons make $3 million and family practice folks make $300,000, and we want them to be the quarterback, but we pay them like the kicker. I mean, those are things we talked about like 40 years ago. So to me, the issue is we don't want to transform. We really don't. The healthcare system, and a lot of my new book around Patient No Longer, the healthcare system is set up in a way that's good for hospitals. When it's good for hospitals, we have the AHA lobby for us. Good for insurers. When it's good for insurers, how do we keep our MLR? Have AHIP lobby for them. Certainly good for pharma. That's what the $800 million of pharma keeping direct-to-consumer advertising. So when you go on Morning Joe, do you have stage 4 lung cancer? Ask your doctor about. Your doctor knows about that drug, but you want him to prescribe that expensive drug. It's so much fun seeing the wars in New York Times full-page articles between the Ozempic, Wegovy, etc., where you can't use non-label things, and the hims and hers of you're getting ripped off by Ozempic, Wegovy, whatever, and we have great compounded drugs. They're both right. And that's why every other country other than 2 doesn't allow direct-to-consumer pharma advertising. But I'm saying all this stuff because we've never really wanted to transform. We wanted to hold on to what we have.
Yeah. I value everything that you're sharing with our listeners. We're going to wrap this show up because we could go on. And you're reminding me of some of the trauma I experienced when I asked you in Dallas, like, why isn't anything changing? Yeah, you're reminding me why it's not changing. So this has been an excellent show, and appreciate all of the insight and your shared thoughts and values with our listeners. You've been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the CMO. Want to learn more about what it is like to be a chief medical officer? Want to be on the show? Email me at leescheinbart@gmail.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. You can listen to the podcast on Apple, and you can also watch the videos of the shows on YouTube. Our show's website is thefirechief.podbean.com. I love talking with leaders and chief medical officers from all over the United States. I love talking with Dr. Stephen Klasko. Stephen, it was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. And look, for all the people listening, be optimistic about the future and be that disruptor / positive transformer.
Thank you for that. And we always wrap the show with this. We use this phrase, and in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, let's be careful out there.